I used to think I understood the night. Not in a poetic way, not like I was some mysterious person who belongs to the dark, but in the practical way you understand a neighborhood you've lived in long enough. I knew which streets kept their lights on, which corners stayed loud even at 2 a.m., which storefront cameras blinked red like they were awake. I knew what ordinary looked like after midnight, and because of that, I got comfortable in a way that I can only describe now as embarrassingly confident. I wasn't reckless, but I was casual. I'd walk with my hands in my pockets, headphones sometimes in one ear, phone half charged, the way you do when you don't think the world is going to challenge you. The night was my decompression chamber. It was where I put my thoughts on a leash and let them run in circles until they tired themselves out. Back then, I lived downtown in a big US city in an apartment that always felt too warm, like the building stored heat in its bones. My roommate, Evan, slept like a person who had never been punished by their own thoughts. He'd say goodnight at a reasonable hour, roll over, and disappear. Meanwhile, I'd lie there listening to the refrigerator click, the pipes sigh, the muffled rush of distant cars, and my mind would start building these unnecessary, vivid movies out of nothing. I'd think about money, about work, about the things I'd said during the day that came out wrong, about the things I didn't say when I should have. Eventually, I'd get up, pull on a hoodie, and go outside because movement was the only way to drain the pressure. Those walks became a routine so familiar it stopped feeling like a decision. I'd leave the building, nod at the doorman if he was there, cut past the closed coffee shop, and drift toward the river, where the air always smelled a little metallic, and the city lights reflected off the water like broken jewelry. I walked the same loops so often I could tell the time by which businesses had already shut their neon off. I saw the same late-night characters, too. Delivery guys on bikes, tired bartenders, people sitting on stoops with their faces lit by phones, a couple arguing quietly like they were trying not to wake the whole street. Once in a while, someone would ask for a cigarette or $1, and I'd say sorry, and that would be the end of it. Nothing ever escalated. Nothing ever stuck to me. That's why, when I tell you what happened, part of me still expects the listener to roll their eyes and say, okay, but what really happened? Because the truth sounds like something that shouldn't fit in a normal city. It was a weeknight, Wednesday. I'm pretty sure, because I remember thinking how empty everything felt for such a large place. The time was somewhere between 1 and 2 in the morning, that strange slice of night where even the people who party hard have started to thin out, and the early shift people haven't begun to wake yet. The sidewalks had that damp shine from earlier rain, and the air had cooled just enough that you could feel it in your lungs. I headed toward the river like usual, taking a quieter side street that ran parallel to a small park. The park was one of those revitalized spots the city bragged about: new benches, better lighting, a sign that claimed there were patrols. I liked it because it was open, and openness feels safer when you're alone. It's harder for your imagination to invent a threat when you can see far in every direction. As I passed the park entrance, I noticed a streetlight flickering down the block. Not the quick stutter you see in horror movies, but a slow, deliberate on and off like it was blinking. At first, I didn't even connect it to anything. I thought the city was doing what cities do, failing quietly. I kept walking, and the light steadied again, bright and normal. I remember smiling to myself, and that little detail, me smiling at a stupid streetlight, sticks with me because later, when I try to replay the night, I keep wanting to go back and shake that version of me. Not because I should have been terrified from the start, but because I should have been more awake to how quickly normal can become a costume. Block later, I turned onto a narrower street with apartment buildings and shuttered storefronts. There was a bus stop halfway down with a bench and a glass case displaying route maps. The street was quiet enough that I could hear my own shoes on the wet sidewalk, and for a moment it felt almost peaceful. Then I saw movement near the bus stop, and my brain did what it always does. It tried to label it as something harmless before it even finished processing the shape. Person at a bus stop. That's all. Just someone waiting or resting. In a city, you learn not to treat every stranger as a scene. You learn to mind your business. But as I got closer, the movement didn't match any ordinary behavior I recognized. The man, because it was a man, I could see that much, was standing under the bus stop's light, not sitting, not packing, but moving in these small, careful motions like he was rehearsing how to stand. He lifted his hands slightly, lowered them, tilted his head, straightened, took one step, paused, then repeated. It looked almost like a dance, except there was no rhythm to it beyond the repetition. It wasn't playful. It wasn't drunk swaying. It was precise, like he was practicing for an audience that wasn't there. He was tall, taller than average, and his body looked thin in the wrong way, like his limbs had too much length for his frame. He wore a dark coat that hung straight and formal. When he turned his face toward me, I saw his smile, and my stomach did that small, immediate drop you feel when something inside you recognizes a threat before you can explain why. It wasn't a grin full of menace. It wasn't a cartoon villain's smile. It was worse because it was trying to be friendly. His mouth was stretched upward, as if he'd been told to smile, and he was obeying. But the rest of his face didn't agree. His cheeks didn't lift naturally. His eyes didn't soften. His eyes were wide and bright, fixed on me with an attention that felt too direct. I've seen people smile badly before, awkward smiles, fake smiles, customer service smiles. But this was like a smile worn by something that didn't understand the emotion behind it. Like a mask that had been memorized. I did what I always did when I wanted to keep things calm. I adjusted my path to give him space, stepping closer to the curb so he'd have most of the sidewalk. I didn't cross the street yet because I didn't want to make a show of it. I didn't want to provoke someone who was maybe just having a strange night. And as I got within 15 feet, he lifted his hands, palms outward, and lowered them again, as if demonstrating that his hands were empty. Then he tilted his head upward, not at me, but above me, like he was looking at the sky. The smile never changed. I could hear a faint buzz from the streetlight above him, and the quiet around us felt staged, like someone had turned down the background volume. I decided to cross the street anyway. Not dramatically, just a quick, practical pivot. I checked for cars, saw none, and stepped off the curb. The moment my shoes hit the road, I noticed something that made my skin tighten. He moved too, just one step, not following, but shifting so that he stayed perfectly aligned with my position. It was like he was matching my coordinates. I crossed to the other side and looked back, expecting him to still be near the bus stop. Instead, he was now standing closer to the street, one foot nearly touching the curb, facing me directly, as if we were connected by an invisible bar. His head was tilted upward again, smile wide, eyes open, and the stillness of him made me feel like prey in a spotlight. I kept walking, faster now, heart picking up. I didn't want to run because running is an admission, and admitting fear can make it feel more real. I'm telling you this because it's important to understand how the mind betrays you in moments like that. Even when your body is screaming at you to leave, your pride tries to negotiate. You tell yourself you're being dramatic. You tell yourself you're misreading. You tell yourself you'll look ridiculous if you sprint away from a man who hasn't technically done anything. That kind of thinking is dangerous because it keeps you in the situation longer than you should be. Behind me, I heard a soft sound like a single clap, then another, slow, gentle, almost polite. I glanced back over my shoulder, and there he was no longer by the bus stop, but in the street now, standing in the lane as if the road belonged to him. He was clapping softly at chest height, palms meeting without force, as if applauding a performance only he could see. He wasn't coming toward me yet. He was just acknowledging something. And as I watched, he stopped clapping and moved his mouth silently, shaping words without making sound, like he was practicing speech. This is the moment my creator brain kicked in, the part of me that narrates life like it's already a story. I remember thinking, if I live through this, people will assume I'm exaggerating. They'll say it's too cinematic. They'll say no one claps like that in the middle of a street. And that thought, weirdly, made me angry because it meant part of me was already trying to turn the fear into content, like it was a way to distance myself from the fact that it was happening right then. That's the thing about fear. It's so intense that your mind will do almost anything to make it feel less immediate, even if that anything is dissociation. I stopped and raised my voice because I needed to break the spell. "Hey," I said, trying to sound firm. "Stop, don't come closer." My voice came out steadier than I expected, but my throat felt tight. He stopped moving his mouth. He stopped clapping. He looked at me, really looked at me now, not at the sky, and he nodded once, slow, like he understood. Then the smile widened by a fraction, not in a joyful way, but in a way that felt like a correction, like he'd been practicing and had improved. He lifted his hands again, palms outward, lowered them, and took one exaggerated step forward, placing his foot down carefully, heel first, then another, and another, the same odd precision as before. He was moving quickly without running, like he was gliding forward in long measured strides, while the rest of his body stayed unnaturally still. I ran. I ran the way you run when you finally stop caring how you look. I sprinted toward the brighter main road near the river, where cars would pass and the streetlights were newer. I kept my eyes forward because I didn't want to trip, and because I didn't want to confirm where he was behind me. But the clapping changed. It sped up, becoming a quick, light patter like a metronome accelerating. The sound wasn't loud, but it cut through the quiet like a knife through cloth. I reached the entrance to the pedestrian bridge and almost slipped on the damp metal threshold, catching myself on the railing. The river below was dark, carrying reflections downstream in fractured strips. I forced myself to look back then, just once, because I needed to know if I was actually being chased, or if my brain had invented the threat. He was on the sidewalk behind me now, closer than he should have been. I don't mean he was sprinting. I mean he was simply closer, as if the distance had been edited. He stood under a streetlight that flickered on, off, on. And for that split second when it went off, his silhouette seemed wrong, stretched, or angled in a way I can't describe without sounding insane. When the light came back on, he looked like a man again. Tall, thin, coat hanging straight, face tilted upward, smile wide. He lifted his hands slowly and clapped once, softly, like he was marking time. I bolted across the bridge. The metal under my shoes rang with each footfall, making me feel exposed. Halfway across, the wind off the river hit my face, cold enough to make my eyes water. I glanced sideways at the water and saw my reflection in the black surface, distorted and shaking. Then I saw something else in that reflection, a second shape, tall and thin, too close behind me. I whipped my head around, and the bridge behind me was empty. Empty. No footsteps, no coat, no smile. Just the distant glow of streetlights and the quiet hum of the city. My stomach lurched. I kept running, because if I stopped to understand what that meant, I knew I'd freeze. At the far end of the bridge, I spilled onto a better lit road where a few cars passed every minute. There was a late night diner on the corner with big windows, bright fluorescent lighting, and the kind of stubborn cheerfulness that only exists in places that never close. I practically threw myself through the door. The bell above it jingled, loud in the quiet, and the smell of coffee and grease hit me like a blanket. A couple sat in a booth, heads close together, not looking up. A tired cook moved behind the counter. A waitress glanced at me with mild annoyance, the look you give someone who's about to become your problem. I didn't know what to say. I couldn't tell her a smiling man is following me without sounding like I'd lost it. So I did the only normal thing I could think of. I asked for water. My hands shook when I set my phone on the table. 7% battery now. I tried to breathe normally. I tried to make my face do a normal expression. Every few seconds, my eyes flicked to the window. Outside, the street looked ordinary. Cars, streetlights, wet asphalt reflecting white light, and then the street light directly across from the diner flickered. On, off, on. My throat went dry. I leaned forward, staring. In the reflection of the diner window, faint as a ghost, overlaying the interior lights, I saw a tall silhouette standing on the sidewalk outside, perfectly still. I couldn't tell if it was truly there, or if my brain was misreading the layered reflections. So I shifted in my booth to change the angle, trying to separate the inside reflections from the outside view. The silhouette remained steady, like it belonged to the street rather than the glass. Then, very slowly, it lifted its hands and clapped once. The sound didn't carry through the glass, but I could see the motion, and my body reacted as if it had. My scalp prickled. My heart kicked hard. I looked down at my phone and finally did what I should have done earlier. I tapped the emergency option, then hesitated, then instead called Evan, because I needed a human anchor more than I needed cops who might take 20 minutes and treat me like an inconvenience. He answered groggy, annoyed. "Dude," he mumbled. "What?" "There's someone outside," I whispered, because my voice refused to be loud. I think he followed me. "I'm at the diner by the bridge. I need you to stay on the phone." There was a pause, and his tone changed just enough to tell me he could hear something wrong in my voice. "Okay," he said, more awake now. "Slow down. What's happening?" I tried to explain without sounding crazy. I said there was a man, tall, smiling weirdly, clapping, following me. I said I ran, and I thought I lost him, and now I think he's outside the diner. Evan didn't interrupt. He didn't laugh. That alone made my fear spike, because if your friend doesn't laugh, it means you sound genuinely scared. "Tell the staff," he said. "Ask them to call someone. Don't go outside." The waitress came to the table with a tired expression. "You want food?" she asked. I opened my mouth, and for a second nothing came out. Then I said, Can you just check outside? There's someone, I think someone, waiting out there." She stared at me, unimpressed. "You got a stalker?" she asked, like it was just another Tuesday. "Maybe," I said, "please." She sighed and walked toward the window near the counter, peering out. I watched her face for a reaction. At first, she looked bored, then confused, then faintly irritated. She leaned closer to the glass and shifted side to side, as if trying to see around something. "There's nobody," she said, turning back to me. "You okay, honey?" I looked at the window again. The sidewalk outside was empty. The streetlight was steady, not flickering now, but in the glass, in the layered reflection, I saw the faint outline of a smile hovering where a face would be, like a trick of light. I blinked hard, and it was gone. I wanted to tell myself the waitress was right, that I was panicking, that my brain was making patterns out of reflections. But my body didn't believe that story. My body believed something else, that the absence of the man outside didn't mean he was gone. It meant he had learned a new place to stand. I stayed in the diner for nearly an hour, forcing myself to sip water, pretending I was waiting for an Uber. pretending I was normal. Evan stayed on the phone until my battery hit 2%, and then I promised I'd text him when I got home. The waitress warmed up to me slightly after a while, the way people do when they realize you're scared, but not dangerous. She offered coffee. I didn't want coffee. I wanted sunrise. I wanted a time of day where monsters don't feel plausible. Eventually, I knew I had to move. Sitting there forever wasn't an option. I asked the waitress if she could call a taxi, and she pointed at a sign that said they didn't do that anymore. But she offered to watch me walk to the main road where there were more people. I thanked her, and her face softened for a moment in that human way that says, "Okay, you're not just being weird, you're actually frightened." I stepped outside with my hood up, hands trembling. The street was brighter than the side street where I'd first seen him. Cars passed. A bus hissed by. Everything looked normal. I told myself the danger had been my imagination, a late-night spiral. I told myself I would walk straight to the busiest road and get a ride home, and that would be the end of it. Then I heard the clap, just one, soft, behind me. I turned so fast my neck hurt. There was no one on the sidewalk. I stood there, breathing hard, scanning the streetlights, the corners, the shadows between parked cars. Nothing. My pulse hammered. The waitress watched me from the doorway with a worried expression, as if she could see me unraveling. I forced myself to walk toward the main road. Every step felt like I was walking through a thin film of water. My ears strained for any sound behind me. Footsteps, fabric, clapping. Cars passed. A couple laughed somewhere across the street. The world continued being the world. I reached the corner where the main road opened up, and I felt a small, shaky relief. More lights, more traffic, a better chance that if someone approached me, someone else would notice. I waited there, pretending to scroll my phone, even though it was dead now. I watched the reflections in the glass of a closed storefront across the road, because I didn't trust my direct vision anymore. And that's when I saw him, not in front of me, but behind me, in the reflection. Tall, thin, coat hanging straight, face tilted upward, smile wide. He was standing across the street from where I just walked, positioned perfectly, so that if I turned around, he wouldn't be in my line of sight immediately, but he'd still be watching. That realization hit me like nausea. It meant he wasn't just following randomly. He was placing himself where I wouldn't look. He was learning how people behave. He was learning how I behave. A car passed and briefly blocked the reflection. When it cleared, he was gone. I did not run this time. Running had got me nowhere except exhausted. Instead, I did something that felt both smart and humiliating. I walked straight into the brightest, busiest place nearby, a 24-hour pharmacy on the corner with automatic sliding doors. The air inside smelled like disinfectant and candy. A bored cashier sat behind the counter, scrolling on his phone. A security guard leaned against a pillar, half asleep. I wanted to cry with relief at the sight of them. Two ordinary humans who looked like they could handle an ordinary problem. I walked up to the security guard and lowered my voice. "I think someone been following me," I said. My mouth felt numb, like the words were coming from someone else. "He's acting strange." The guard looked me up and down, assessing whether I was drunk, high, or just dramatic. "Where?" he asked, not moving. I gestured toward the windows. Outside, I saw him across the street. He straightened slowly and walked toward the glass, peering out. He stood there for a moment, scanning. Then he shrugged. "I don't see anybody," he said, and there was a note of boredom again, like he'd already decided this was nothing. My stomach dropped. "He was there," I insisted, and my voice cracked slightly. "I saw him." The guard turned back to me. "You want me to call the cops?" he asked, but his tone suggested he didn't want to. I hesitated because I pictured the conversation. I pictured officers arriving, asking me to describe a man who smiles and claps, then telling me to go home and stop panicking. I pictured the guard rolling his eyes the second I turned away. I pictured being left alone again, so instead I did another practical thing. "Can I just wait here a bit?" I asked, "until I can get a ride?" He nodded, already losing interest. "Yeah, just don't cause a scene," he said. I stayed near the front, under the bright fluorescent lights, where my skin looked pale in the glass. I tried to slow my breathing. I tried to reset my mind. I told myself the man couldn't get me in here. I told myself if he was even real, if he wasn't just some feverish product of an anxious night, then he would eventually leave when he realized I wasn't playing. And then the automatic doors slid open, not because someone walked in. There was no footstep, no body passing the sensor. The doors opened anyway. They slid apart with that soft mechanical whisper, revealing the sidewalk outside. Empty. The door stayed open for a few seconds, then slid shut again. The cashier looked up briefly, annoyed. The guard glanced over, then shrugged and returned to leaning. I stood there with my heart pounding, staring at the doors like they'd just spoken. A minute later, they opened again. Empty sidewalk. Close. This happened 3 times, spaced out like a rhythm. That's when I realized the man didn't need to stand in front of me to affect the world around me. Or, more accurately, he didn't need to be visible for me to feel watched. The effect was the same. The fear was the same. I couldn't stay there forever. So I ordered a rideshare from the cashier's counter, using their public Wi-Fi, hands shaking as I typed. When the driver arrived, I didn't walk outside until I could see the car parked directly in front of the store, headlights spilling bright cones onto the pavement. I practically ran to the passenger door and yanked it open, sliding in as if the seat itself was safety. The driver glanced at me. "You good?" he asked, eyebrows raised. "Yeah," I lied, because what else do you say? "Just a long night." We pulled away, and I stared out the window, scanning every sidewalk we passed. Streetlights flickered occasionally in the normal way lights do. and every time my body flinched. I kept expecting to see that tall silhouette in some impossible place, under an overpass, in an empty lot, standing behind a lamppost like a shadow that forgot its object. I saw nothing. The city rolled by, indifferent. When we reached my building, I paid and got out quickly, not wanting to linger on the curb. The lobby was quiet. The doorman wasn't there now, replaced by a sleepy security camera above the desk that blinked a red light like a heartbeat. The elevator ride felt too long. Every floor we passed felt like a countdown. I kept imagining the doors opening and revealing the man standing there, smiling at the ceiling. They opened to my floor. Empty hallway. I walked fast to my apartment door, keys trembling in my hand. I got inside, locked the deadbolt, and leaned back against the door, breathing hard. Evan was awake now, sitting on the couch with his phone in his hand, face pale. "Dude," he said quietly, "what happened?" I told him everything, and as I spoke, I could hear how unbelievable it sounded. The bus stop, the smile, the clapping, the reflection, the doors opening on their own. Evan didn't interrupt. He listened with his jaw clenched, and when I finished, he exhaled slowly like he'd been holding his breath. "You should call the police," he said. "And say what?" I asked, and my voice was sharper than I meant it to be. That a tall guy smiled at me and clapped. That streetlights flickered. Evan looked down at his phone, then back up. "You're not making it up," he said. "I could hear it. I could hear you freaking out." I wanted to be comforted by that, but instead it made me feel worse. Because if Evan believed me, it meant the fear wasn't just in my head. It meant something had happened that I couldn't file away neatly. I didn't sleep. I sat in the living room until sunrise, lights on, TV playing low volume, the way people do when they want to drown out the feeling of being alone. The next day, I called in sick to work. I told myself it was because I was exhausted. The truth was I didn't want to step outside again. By the second night, the embarrassment started creeping in, because that's how fear works. The first night, it's pure adrenaline. The next day, it's exhaustion. The next night, it's embarrassment. You start thinking, maybe I overreacted. Maybe it was just some weirdo. Maybe I turned it into a monster because I was alone and tired. You try to reclaim your identity as a rational person. On the third night, I decided to test it. Not by going back to the same street, no way, but by stepping outside my building and walking just half a block, staying on the bright main road, telling myself I could handle that. Evan tried to stop me, but I insisted. I needed proof that the world was still normal. I walked to the corner where a convenience store stayed open late. I stood under the bright sign and watched cars pass. I listened to city noise. I breathed. Nothing happened. My shoulders relaxed a fraction. I felt stupid for being scared. Then across the street, a streetlight flickered. On, off, on. And on the offbeat of that flicker, I saw a silhouette in the reflection of the convenience store window behind me, tall and thin, head tilted upward. I turned around instantly. No one. I looked back at the glass reflection, a faint curve of a smile, like a bright scratch on the dark. Gone. I walked back into my building with my heart in my throat. And I didn't step outside at night again for months. Time passed, but the memory didn't fade the way memories usually do. It didn't blur at the edges. It stayed sharp, and sometimes it got sharper, like my brain was polishing it. I began noticing clapping in normal contexts, applause in a movie, someone clapping to call a dog, a kid clapping excitedly, and every time my stomach tightened. I'd hear a single clap in my head while I lay in bed, and I'd sit up suddenly, listening, realizing the sound was only memory. Even then, my body reacted, as if memory could reach out and touch me. A couple weeks after that night, I did something I'm not proud of. I tried to find out if anyone else had seen him. I searched local community posts, neighborhood discussions, anything. I wasn't looking for ghost stories. I was looking for a practical explanation. A known weirdo. A guy who does street performance. A person with a mental health issue who wanders at night. Anything that would make the experience fit into the world again. I found nothing, which honestly would have been comforting if not for one detail that arrived like a delayed punch. About a month after the incident, I was coming home late for me, but still before midnight, and I noticed a new flyer taped near the building entrance. It was a missing person notice. A young woman, early 20s, smiling in a normal way, with a description and a phone number. The date she was last seen was a Wednesday, somewhere between 1 and 2 in the morning, near the park by the river. My stomach turned cold. I stared at that flyer for a long time, reading the words over and over, trying to force myself not to connect dots I had no right to connect. Because correlation is not proof. Because missing person flyers exist all the time in cities. Because I didn't see anything happen. Because my story was just about a man who smiled and clapped. It could be unrelated. It could be coincidence. But my body didn't believe in coincidence anymore. That was the moment I started asking myself questions I didn't want to ask. What was he doing under that streetlight? Was he rehearsing to look normal? Was he learning how to approach people without triggering alarm? Was his smile an attempt at camouflage? And the clapping, was it a signal? Was it a habit? Was it communication? The more I tried to reason it out, the more it slipped away from ordinary logic. And the worst part was how my mind kept returning to that tiny, unnerving detail. He never looked at me when he moved. He looked upward, as if tracking something above the street, something we don't pay attention to. Like the sky was giving him cues. Months later, I moved out of that apartment for unrelated reasons, work changes, a better place, the usual adult life shifts that happen. Evan and I stayed friends. The city became a chapter I didn't revisit often. With distance, you'd think the fear would shrink, but it didn't. It simply changed shape. Instead of being about that one street, it became about patterns. Streetlights flickering, reflections behaving strangely, automatic doors opening for no reason. Those things are mundane until they are. Once you've had one night where the mundane feels coordinated, you start worrying that reality has hidden seams. Here's the part I almost never tell people because it sounds like I'm trying to force a twist. I'm telling it now because if I were watching a video like this, I'd want the full truth, not a tidy ending. About a year after the incident, I came back to that neighborhood during the day. It was bright, sunny, full of people. Kids ran through the park, joggers passed. The river looked harmless. I stood near the bus stop where I'd first seen him, and it looked ridiculous that I'd been afraid there. In daylight, you can't imagine the night version of things. The world feels too honest. I walked the route I'd run that night, trying to prove to myself that my fear was only a night story. I reached the diner by the bridge and went inside, ordered coffee, sat by the window. The waitress was different. The cook was different. The whole scene was different. I stared at my reflection in the glass and tried to laugh at myself. That's when I noticed a small sign taped near the register, half hidden behind a candy display. It wasn't a missing person flyer. It wasn't dramatic. It was one of those simple notices businesses post when something keeps happening. It read, "If your ride arrives, please wait inside until you see them at the curb. Do not linger outside after midnight. Staff will not unlock doors for anyone standing silently." I felt my skin tighten. I asked the waitress casually, like I didn't care. "Weird sign," I said. "Something happened." She shrugged with that exhausted service worker shrug that says the world is full of nonsense and you're tired of it. "There's some guy," she said, "used to stand out there and freak people out. Just stares, smiles, doesn't say anything, creeps people out. Boss got sick of it." My mouth went dry. "Does he still come around?" I asked, trying to keep my tone light. She shook her head. "Haven't seen him in a while," she said. Then she added, almost as an afterthought, "He clapped sometimes." Like one clap, like he was calling someone. I sat there with my coffee cooling, staring at the window, and I felt something inside me sink into a quiet certainty. Not a certainty that I knew what he was. Not a certainty that I could explain it. Just the certainty that I hadn't imagined him. That my fear had been accurate, even if my explanation was. I left the diner and walked back toward the bus stop. The streetlight above it was new now, bright and steady. The bus stop glass reflected my face clearly in the afternoon sun. I stood there for a while, watching people pass, telling myself the story was over, that I'd gotten closure, that I could put it away. And then, in the glass reflection, I saw a tall figure pass behind me on the sidewalk. Just a passerby, probably. I turned quickly anyway, reflexive. There was no one. I looked back at the glass. For a second, just a second behind my reflection, I saw the faint curve of a smile, too wide to be mine. Then it was gone, swallowed by sunlight and movement and the ordinary noise of daytime. I walked away without running, I didn't sprint. I didn't panic. I kept my pace steady because I refused to give the fear the satisfaction of owning me in daylight. But inside, my nervous system was already waking up like an alarm that never fully resets. I told myself it was just a trick of reflections. I told myself it was just my brain. I told myself it was nothing. That night, back in my hotel room, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, and I heard a single clap from somewhere down the hallway. One soft sound that could have been anything. A door closing, a person dropping something, a neighbor making noise. In a normal life, you ignore a sound like that. In my life, after that night by the river, you don't ignore it. You listen. You hold your breath. You wait to see if there will be another. There was, but I still didn't sleep, because the scariest part wasn't the chase, or the smile, or the clapping. The scariest part was what it suggested, that something had watched me learn the rules of being safe and had practiced those rules like choreography. That it wasn't random, and it wasn't sloppy, and it wasn't lost. It was rehearsing. It was improving. And if you're wondering why I'm telling you this now, why I'm turning it into a story instead of keeping it as a private nightmare, it's because speaking it out loud is the only way I've found to keep it from living silently in the corners of my mind. If I name it, it becomes a thing I can carry. If I keep it unspoken, it becomes a thing that carries me. And even now, years later, when I see a streetlight blink for no reason, or an automatic door open when no one is there, my body remembers that night like it happened yesterday. I don't take walks after midnight anymore. Not because I think the city is full of monsters, but because I learned something I didn't want to learn. Sometimes fear isn't earned. Sometimes it's given. Sometimes it arrives quietly, smiling like it's friendly, clapping like it's congratulating you, and waiting for the exact moment you stop looking. And if you ever find yourself alone on a quiet street, and you hear a single soft clap behind you, don't argue with yourself about whether you're being dramatic. Don't negotiate with your pride. Don't try to be polite. Just go somewhere bright, somewhere with people, and don't wait outside staring into reflections. Because whatever I saw that night didn't need darkness to exist. It just needed me to believe I was safe.